Now, when we look at the subject of why hockey equipment is so expensive, and also more importantly, why it's priced so differently in different countries, there's a few factors we have to consider, and that's what I wanted to touch on in this video. I posted an Instagram post a while back on my story that I was really surprised at, so I had to share it. For the first time in the history of me being involved in this game, hockey equipment is cheaper in England than it is in the USA, which in my mind really doesn't make a lot of sense. And I got so much interaction, so many inbox messages about this information, people checking out prices in other European countries, England no longer being in Europe, but that's a separate thing. And I was hearing messages about how it's even cheaper in Russia, even cheaper in Finland. Now, why is that? And before we jump into the video, please comment down below, because I think this would be really interesting to see how much you feel comfortable spending on a pair of skates in US dollars. Comment down below and let us know what you feel comfortable spending on a pair of skates and roughly how long a pair of skates lasts you. And also let me know what you feel comfortable spending on a hockey stick in US dollars again down below, and roughly how long a stick lasts you before you need to buy another one. I think that would be really good for us to kind of see and discuss in the comment section down below, because I think this is going to surprise a lot of people. So please leave that down below. I'll do the same as well. Leave those comments down below because I think that'll be fun before we jump into the video. And of course, if you like this type of content, thumbs up and subscribe. But let's jump into the video. Now, the other question that rolls off of the back of that, and I receive a lot of messages daily about that, is why is hockey equipment getting more expensive? Now, there's a few ways that we can look at this, but first thing I wanted to tackle is why it's priced so differently in different countries. Because if we look at, for example, Stick A, I'm going to refer to it as, there was almost a $200 difference between Stick A being priced in Russia and Finland versus USA, which is a massive, massive difference. If we look at sticks that we actually know about, for example, like the FT5 Pro from CCM, the pricing of that stick in Russia, Finland, England, and USA is very different, USA being the most expensive by a long shot. And it's the exact same thing that we see with skates, and also more recently, the Agent stick from Bauer. Over $100 price difference when you look at it priced in the USA versus Finland. And that's from the date of when this video was shot, so don't hold me to that in case pricing has shifted. But what's affecting that? Now, when we look at the manufacturers that make the hockey equipment that we all know and love, the main thing that affects the pricing that they will say is going to be shipping. If we look at a map of where hockey equipment is manufactured, a lot of it is manufactured in the Far East. Now, this has to be mentioned that we're not talking about pro stock, or in some cases pro stock can be manufactured in North America, but more importantly, custom pieces that we see from manufacturers, whether that be sticks or more importantly, skates, and even some cases with gloves and other pieces of protective. Custom is traditionally manufactured in North America, so let's put that aside. I'm talking about the equipment that you walk into a hockey store and buy straight off the shelf. If we look at that being manufactured in Asia, for example, a country that we know makes hockey equipment, which is Vietnam, that means that the shorter distance the products have to travel from once they've been actually created and manufactured, the shorter the distance they travel to the country that they're being sold in, the lower the overall cost. There's a trickle-down effect because shipping or transit hasn't cost as much, so the overall total of the product in retail stores for a particular country can be less. Now, if we look at a map, this is a nice way of looking at it to try and figure out why pricing is so different. If we look at transporting goods from Asia to Finland, and then from Finland to England, and then England to the USA and Canada, which is the furthest country we're looking at in terms of transport? It's going to be the US and Canada. So this is one of the ways that you could say, okay, it's traveling a greater distance, so thus more shipping costs, more transit costs, the price is going to be higher at retail level. But it gets a lot more interesting from there. There are a lot of other factors that come into play with this. We can mention it as the big five. One of them we've already looked at, which is transport. From there it goes down to labor, taxes, regulations, and then lastly, the one that we'll touch on is going to be demand. Now, when we look at the second one, which is labor, essentially, I don't mean the product being made, which obviously comes into play as well, but what I mean by that is the amount of hands that have to come into contact with the product before it reaches the shelves in the retail stores that we're in. The more hands the product or the shipment has to go through, the more costs are going to be associated with that product at retail level. Now, this is a point that's relevant during the actual manufacturing of the product, and it's also relevant in actually transporting the product from where it's made to where it's being sold. Some other points you could look at is also, once it reaches the country, how big is that country? How difficult is it to distribute the product once it reaches, for example, the USA throughout the whole of the USA? If we're to VS this against, for example, Finland, Finland is a geographically much smaller country than the USA. America can be a continent in itself. And I don't mean North America, which is a continent, I mean the country, the USA, that could be a continent by itself. So for example, once the product reaches Finland, distributing that product within Finland across all of the distribution chains or hubs to get it to retail stores is a much more straightforward and simple process because it is a geographically smaller country. There is way less space to be able to have to move products around. But now if we VS that against the USA and Canada, these countries are colossal in size, and that product has to travel from one point of the country throughout all of the different states in the USA and the different provinces in Canada, which can be challenging because of the terrain, the distance. All of this is going to have an impact on the overall price that consumers or hockey players see when it gets to the retail level. And of course, remember the point about the more hands coming into contact with the product before it reaches your hands, the higher the cost is going to be. That's always reflected. Now, the next point we're going to be looking at is the taxes and duties that reach the product as well. Now, when a shipment reaches a country, the government is going to want to take a cut. That's just how it goes. There's nothing anyone can do about that. That has to be done. And different countries will have different rules about what percentage of the government is able to take once the shipment reaches the country. This is going to have, again, another massive impact on the pricing that we see. Next up on the list is going to be the restrictions. Now, this I could even touch on, for example, the pricing that a manufacturer will negotiate with a retailer, and this is kind of like the guide price that has to be met. And of course, this is where retailers have to negotiate the profit margins with whoever they're buying their products from. That aside, there's also going to be restrictions that are based around what type of product is being moved. Does it need to be repackaged? Does it need to be handled with care or modified before it reaches the country that it's being sold in? All of these things play a part in the overall cost that we're going to see when a product hits the retail stores. Now, last but not least is going to be demand. Now, typically you would expect when demand goes up, that means that retailers can negotiate better pricing with manufacturers, they can ship in higher numbers, essentially hopefully reducing the price at a retail level. But this doesn't always happen, especially with what we've seen in the world more recently. Although demand might be going up for things like sticks and skates and protective, at the same time, we have to look at what's happening to supply. Supply is actually decreasing, which means when demand goes up, the need for that product is going up, but there is less access to that product. That's going to make the price from a retail level, reflected for us as players, go up. There's a bunch of things that can happen to increase the pricing, which is essentially what we're seeing right now, and the reason that I wanted to make this video to try and clear some of those things up. Now, of course, each of the subjects that I've touched on in this video could be a separate video in itself. I'm trying to kind of smash everything together to hopefully make sense to anyone that's watching this and trying to kind of figure out why hockey equipment is priced so differently in different countries and why the price at the minute seems to be going up and not down. Now, that aside, which is looking at why hockey equipment is priced differently in different countries, the other question is, why is the price of hockey equipment on the up? When we look at carbon composite sticks, it's not something that's new depending on how old you are and how long you've been playing hockey for. It's not new for me. The first stick I got my hands on was a composite stick. So why did that stick cost sub $100? And today, sticks are easily being sold for $360 and, you know, a lot of people aren't batting an eyelid, people are still picking them up. Now, there is a bunch of different reasons for that, but again, I'm going to try to break it into categories that make sense for everyone. The first one is going to be when we look at the way that these products are manufactured, the materials that are being used to make them. We've seen in the world a bunch of supply chain issues, which is something that isn't only responsible for pricing because, of course, supply chain issues haven't always been a problem since COVID, but what we do see is, for example, with carbon fiber, that's a material that is used so heavily in the world today, whether it's the automotive industry. I've seen cutlery made of carbon fiber, watch straps made of carbon fiber. So it's a material that is in high demand. And like I mentioned previously, if there isn't an abundance of supply to this product because so many people need it, supply isn't as high as it could possibly be, that's going to have an impact on the price. But I think one of the ones that is something that we take for granted is we push manufacturers to give us better products year on year. And this can be said for like mobile phones. I remember when I had an iPhone that cost, about $400 and hearing rumors of an iPhone that was going to cost over $1,000, and I laughed. Who in their right mind is going to spend over $1,000 on a phone? It sounded like madness, but here we are. We just do it without batting an eyelid, which is mad to actually think about. But at the same time, I don't have to buy that. I wanted a better phone with a better camera, with a larger screen. That's going to come at a cost. Now, when we look at it from a hockey perspective, we push manufacturers to give us better performing sticks that are lighter, more durable, that have better pop, better releases so we can shoot harder and faster. That's gonna come at a cost. They're gonna have to create innovations and partner up with other companies to give us products that are the best of the best for the time frame that we're in right now. And year on year, we see manufacturers upping their game and improving the equipment that we have access to essentially allow us to do our jobs on the ice to a more effective level. Now, of course, the argument is, do a lot of us need this? Probably not, but do we want it? Hell yeah. And of course, there's gonna be a cost associated with that. The better tech, the more expensive it's gonna be to buy. But from there, one of the ones that I feel is the most overlooked is gonna be the involvement of third-party manufacturers, brands, working together to be able to create a product. If we look at a stick, for example, you see a stick with a Bauer logo on it, a CCM logo, a True logo, a Warrior logo, and you assume that that's who's made that product. But when you actually break down the mechanics and the technology that's in that stick, helmet, or skates, you start to see that these names, for example, Sigmatex, or with the new Bauer stick, Boron, although that's Bauer using a new material or substance or element that creates a phenomenal product, what I think is missed is Boron is being supplied by another company. Sigmatex is a completely separate company from the manufacturer making that stick. It's not the same thing. And that essentially means that when you have this finished product that has perhaps 4, 5 companies collaborating together to create, that's gonna have a knock-on impact on the overall price that you pay for the product. Now, when you look at it, it seems like it's just Bauer or CCM that's made this product, but there are other companies that are working with them. And sometimes the names of the technology that we're seeing in the sticks, the skates, the gloves, the helmets, isn't from the manufacturer that's making it, from the hockey manufacturer. It could be a completely separate company that's collaborating with the hockey manufacturer to create this product. And what does that mean? Essentially, each of the bodies involved in creating this final product are gonna need to take a cut out of that, which again has a massive impact on the price that we see from a retail level. When you look at sticks that were sold back in the day that were $50, $20, $100, it's kind of like the technology was moving up, they might have only been made by 1 or 2 sources, but today a product is made by multiple sources, which means multiple profit margins have to be taken out to be able to make sure everyone gets a piece of the pie. Now again, in terms of collaborations with different companies working together to create a product, it's the same thing with D3O and CCM. We see D3O in a lot of CCM's products, but D3O is a completely separate entity to CCM, and they come together to be able to create the awesome protective equipment that we see that features D3O in the SuperTax range, whether it be helmets, whether it be protection in terms of the gloves or the leg pads. These are 2 different companies that are collaborating together to give us a finished product. And that's the reason why hockey equipment is getting so much more expensive than it was back in the day, because when you see the full picture, it kind of becomes a little bit clear why pricing is going up. Now, something I wanted to mention, which could be a completely separate video, is do you believe that the players and the way that the game is changing is essentially creating the equipment that we need to be able to support it? In other words, do you think that the equipment that we're using in hockey is being driven by how the game is adapting in terms of the way players are playing the game? Or is the equipment adapting and we're adapting with the equipment and that's affecting the way that the game is being played? I'd love to make a separate video on that. If you'd like me to do so, leave a comment down below and I'll see what I can do about creating that. But hopefully this paints a better picture about why the pricing in hockey equipment is so different in different countries and why we see it at an all-time high versus what it was in previous times. But as always, guys, a big thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. If you have any questions that I've not covered in the video, please make sure you comment down below. And if you want to see the video where we discuss, is equipment changing the way that we play the game, or is the game changing and the equipment is supporting that? If you want to see that video, comment down below because I'd love to create that. But any questions, leave them down below. Make sure you thumbs up and subscribe and turn the bell notification on so you can stay up to date with all of the videos that we post. And I'll catch you in the next one. Take care, guys.